Today's episode is a little different. It's our holiday edition. We thought it would be fun to take a spin on the 12 gifts of Christmas and do a 12 gifts of Ops Christmas. It is designed to be highly tactical, like everything else we're trying to do on this pod. And what we did was brought on an amazing operator alongside me, and Nikhil's sitting on the sidelines because this was too deep into the ops for him. As a little caveat, mine tend to be a bit more early stage. So this is like 0 to 1 building of your ops, things I don't ever want you to mess up on, and things I learned the hard way. Sandy is coming in a little bit later stage, so she's going to share a little bit before we jump in.
Yeah, so hey everyone, my name is Sandy Varatharajah. I work at Firsthand and I lead our activation business unit, which is focused on the first 90 days of engagement with our very low income, seriously mentally ill Medicaid population. As Danielle mentioned, I focus more on like the 1 to 100 phase. So once you have proof of concept of something, how do you go build the thing, whether that's product, teams, etc. So excited to share some nuggets and battle scars with y'all.
So basically between us, Sandy, we've covered like, you just started a company to like IPO.
Yes. Exit. Yeah. We've conquered healthcare.
We conquered healthcare in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
All right. Sandy, do you feel like starting us off?
Sure.
Hell yeah.
Actually, can you start?
Okay. Gift number 1 for me is to not think like an ops person when you're in an ops role, and rather to think like a product person when you're in an ops role. When you're a product person and you look at things like product, you think about how they scale, you look at how tech can be a solution, you look at user needs, and basically the entire product development lifecycle is just a shoe-in for solving the same kinds of ops challenges. In fact, I'd argue that most of the challenges that you're trying to solve right now are not ops challenges, but they are product challenges. And so leveling up your ability to answer those questions is a really great way for you to kind of solve bigger business problems. That's my first one.
I love this one. I feel like we could end the episode right there because so many of my gifts are related to this topic. I feel like I've grown so much as an operator because I've worked with talented product managers. So like the rituals, the muscle, just even like your mindset of approaching problems is very different. And it's at least one structured way to learn about how to think about a problem.
Agree.
So I love this piece of advice.
So
we're done, right?
2. Yeah.
Well, gift number 2. Run a drip campaign to incept ideas. It helps you warm up to big decisions. Everybody who works with you is running at 110%. They're really far from context on what you're thinking about, but you really need their buy-in to get stuff done. So when I say like big decisions, I mean centralizing a team or investing like $1 million to hire up a team, investing an engineer's chunk of time for an entire quarter just to build out this one, product, whatever it is. And I think the most strategic way to get that done is not like a really crisply written document once a quarter that you present to your executive team. It is that slow drip campaign that happens over time, which I think is highly strategic. So what that looks like for me, I write a monthly biz report. I write regular Slack updates. We do kind of stand-ups on our ops teams just to read out what's happening. We do OKR readouts with our executives. That might sound really meeting heavy, but the point is that you're building this regular writing and thinking muscle of what you're learning, and you're communicating that out to the rest of the business. The other thing I think that helps with is something I like to call taking the covert to the overt. So I think people might be scared to share what they're learning, either because it's not going as well as it needs to be, or they're worried about a reaction. And I think this is the best way to just put all the facts out there and give people a surface to react, because if they are not reacting with the slow drip over time, they're definitely going to react in that big arena moment when you're like walking into the room and pitching an idea to them. So drip campaign, that's my gift number 2.
I can see drip campaigns being really effective at kind of giving some perspective at what's coming ahead. So from like a solution standpoint, like, oh, next quarter, we're going to be, we're thinking engineering time to be used on XYZ resource, like you said. But then when I heard you explaining it, it sounded a bit more like you're almost trying to prime people to the magnitude of the problem that you're trying to solve and getting more buy-in around the problem being something requiring the business attention versus the solution being the right answer to it. So
Yes.
I just want to distinguish which one is it. And if folks listening, what would you suggest them to do with that?
Yeah. For me, at least at the pace we're running at, it's been about 70% the right problem and 30% what your solutions are. And obviously your solutions are going to change flavors over time. Maybe to start, it's going to be very people focused, brute forcing with people, and then it becomes infusing that into your product roadmap. But no one is going to listen to you if they don't even agree with the right problem.
I think I've got the best gift 3 to piggyback off that one. And it's actually maybe the seed towards building that muscle of like trying to explain context, trying to get people to understand problems the way that you're seeing them. And it comes from my fave book, The Artist's Way, my girl, Julia Cameron. She has this lovely quote called "Sight is insight." Sandy, your point of like giving insight into the problems, one of the best ways I've seen to do that is give people sight into the problems. So rather than trying to extrapolate a really difficult interaction with like a health advocate or whoever is your stakeholder, bring that person along with you, right? Like let them see that problem firsthand. Maybe like I've suggested many times before, like get them on the phone with customers as well, right? Like folks in your organization need to see problems and experience problems for them to also get that same level of buy-in to understand that they are problems. So when you are finding yourself using a lot of words, one of the ways you can counter that is have them actually see it for themselves and live it first person.
I love this one, Deepo. I think this is especially important when a lot of fellow operators in healthcare belong to something I call the knowledge class. And a lot of our frontline workers, especially in services business, may not. And I don't mean that demeaningly. Like our frontline workers are doing really heavy services work day in and day out. And we don't speak the same language often. We're not working out of the same tooling. We don't use the same rituals. And there is nothing that can replace lived experience, full stop. Like you cannot learn from afar in an ivory tower. So I really, really love this one. Gift number 4, face your hidden factories, make swim lane maps. This one is so process heavy. It like elicits this image of working underground in a basement, like nudging shapes around in PowerPoint. But for me, this has paid a lot of dividends this year. So how often have you told your PM or whoever your counterpart is as an operator, and you've said, I know exactly what's happening in this process, and turns out you actually don't? Like this has happened to me many times this year. I think especially when we're running so quickly at problems, we end up carrying a lot of, extra baggage, extra processes, Band-Aids. It's that, meme of lots of blocks being held up by a single ops associate who knows everything that's going on. So for me, it's been really helpful to sit down with product and map out our swim lane diagrams. And ideally, those diagrams are answering who is doing what and when for some complex workflow. And it outlines tools and people as different swim lanes that can own or have something, have some action taken. So, one example from my year, we actually completely messed up one of our major data models that informed business reporting and a lot of other ops workflows because we didn't map out this process in the right way in the first place. And so this led to a lot of building in features into our front end user experience in our platform that didn't make any sense. And it set us back by a few months in terms of reporting and a bunch of other things. So if I could rewind time, I would have just sat down for 2 hours and mapped everything out in a swim lane diagram. I don't know. Have you tried doing this?
I think I don't know what a swim lane diagram is because I wasn't in management consulting. It reminds me of like MISI or like one of those other frameworks. Could you explain, like I'm 5, what a swim lane diagram is?
So very simply, it's a diagram that has a bunch of rows, and each row represents, in this case, a person or a tool that touches a process. And within each swim lane, you're listing out different steps that are taken. So for example, you might have a top lane that represents your customer service agent, a second lane that represents, the CRM that they're working out of. The third lane represents a fax system that they also are sending materials out from. And so you're just like constantly pinballing different processes around. And sometimes the most alarming thing about doing that is you realize how inefficient your process is because you're just like going like this zigzagging. And that itself is really useful learning. I think we assume in ops that things will just work out because we have a team that's like really dedicated to this knowledge, but it sometimes devils in the details.
Love this. I have made a swim lane diagram. Did not know I did that. I made an Olympic size level swim lane diagram. Let me tell you a few use cases that this
Yeah.
is especially helpful. Number one, if you are going to be transitioning out of your role, which happens a lot in early stage, a swim lane diagram is like the best, tool to share with somebody as they're coming in. But even better is that if you co-design that with the person coming in. So early on when we were hiring like a director level into our call center and they came in and they were like, what is going on here? We built that together and that was their onboarding process. And later on, that was actually version controlled and locked. So any changes had to be reflected on this diagram. And then we would get like push notifications of changes made there. So nobody could touch it. There were like 2 people allowed to edit this diagram. And it was the source of truth for the entire member journey end to end. Massively helpful. One of the ways I've seen to be like kind of a fun add-on activity on top of it is like to use one of those whiteboarding softwares or whatnot and like use emojis to identify areas of opportunity.
Yes.
So I always like use like lightning rods on an area that I think could be automated. And you can kind of like dot vote that where like everybody gets like 5 lightning rods and throughout it, they get to put like an area that they think should be automated. And it's an interesting way to kind of run product or ideas around like areas of opportunity on top of this like one centralized, now I know, swim lane diagram.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Oh,
great
I wonder
one.
what you were calling it before, but I do love the emoji
Member
ideas.
journey.
That's okay. I like that. But especially when there's so many internal sausage making processes, it may not even discreetly touch the member, right? I love the emoji idea. That's awesome.
So my gift number 5 is to start an offboarding doc. I think this framing is a really interesting and different framing towards trying to share information. So Sandy, if you were leaving firsthand tomorrow, you'd have to make an offboarding doc, sad face. And if you were to think about building that offboarding doc, it would be much more in the context of somebody else has to come in here and literally do this job blind versus like, oh yeah, I'm going to be here and I can shepherd you through this process. Like, no, you're out of the equation and someone else has to come in. I've heard someone do this for every single job that they come into. They start an offboarding doc on their first day.
Whoa, that's a
Hardcore.
lot. Yeah, that's dedication.
I love running docs. Like that's definitely something of mine that is like forever going to be instilled in my DNA. And I think if I ever did rejoin a company, I would make an offboarding doc day one.
Yeah, I think
Thoughts?
first of all, I agree. I don't know about day one. That seems demeaning. Like you're trying to figure out, not demeaning, but intense. The goal ultimately for all of us, we will all leave our companies at some point, whether that's after an exit or it's right in the thick of shit. And
That's true.
ultimately we want, at least for the sake of the patients that we serve, for the company to far outlast us as individuals, as people that drive a lot of process and knowledge sharing. So I think it's important. I think when you say offboarding doc, what does that actually look like? Are you mapping out like the internal politics of the org? Or are you mapping out key decisions? Like what goes on an offboarding doc?
I think there's some just like areas of obvious things where you didn't even realize you have so much ownership of. So for example, one of them for me was software ownership. I think I was responsible for like 30 pieces of software leaving the company.
Wow.
And that was such an obvious and like silly bottleneck to be responsible for. So I think small things that when you're like literally are untethered from your org, like a software or like a software diagram where it's like 1, software, 2, who owns it? 3, is it active? 4, what's the business case? 5, like payment structure, renewal. 6, link to contract. Done. Like you're going to have to make something like that because especially if you're first person, you're standing up like every function from the ground up, which includes a lot of just like the mechanical parts of standing it up. And so codifying that would be like one easy place to start on an offboarding document. I think you're right. Like there is the point in time things of an offboarding doc that don't work, like projects that are in flight right now, but there's more like just things that you're repeating every single day that the next person will have to do, or like structural components to the way, software is architected. Even locations of documents is super, super helpful for yourself as well. How-to guides on software, and just like basically like 101 things that every employee or people walking into your role might benefit from knowing, that obviously can then be recycled into like the training, documentation, or whatever as your company keeps growing. But I agree, like continuity of care also extends towards the internal side of things. So it is super important. I think just generally, when you are designing documentation, thinking about if you were completely out of the equation is just a helpful way to think about somebody else coming in with fresh eyes versus you needing to shepherd them through that.
So gift number 6, prove something can be done before you hire a team around it. This has been huge for us this year at Firsthand. We're post Series B. There's a lot of scaling from, single thousands of individuals to many, many more order of magnitude. It's really easy when you're in that hyperscale mode to jump from this is inefficient and I don't really know what we need to hiring somebody. Just fill the gap with hiring. It's a cheaper way to do things. It's a faster way to do things than like investing in product, frankly. But this is important because if you raise costs, you're raising overhead, you raise the burden of proof of value. So you better really understand your problems well before you're hiring around them, because you're going to have to demonstrate value from that hire on day one. So for me this year, we had a lot of big problems we were running at, and we were frankly creating roles that don't exist at other traditional healthcare companies. So there was a lot of new blue sky mapping we had to do with just people and profiles and JDs. So we approached new roles and teams with the rigor of grooming a new tech initiative. So I would extend myself or an existing team member into like a new adjacent role for 3 months, and they'd probably be working at, I don't want to say over 100%, but they'd be at full capacity exploring a totally different problem, just so we could get eyes and ears on something and just start testing out like, what is it that we actually need here? And this did stretch myself and a lot of my direct reports a lot, but it was really worth it in the end. Why? Because we understood our problem better. And you started to build multiple use cases for that role instead of just, hiring to fill a gap. So several examples of this: fractional consultants for, tactical ops roles that you need. If you're thinking about promoting really high performing ICs, first put them in sort of a player coach role with other team members and have them mentor before you hire them in. Run quarter-long pilots around a problem. For us, I actually did several of these this year and ended up figuring out that the problem I thought we were setting out to solve was not the problem that I needed to hire around at all. So anyway, I think this whole principle is waiting out discomfort so you can learn something meaningful and actually solve the real problem instead of just flailing at problems.
I love that one, Cindy. All right, let's go. Gift 7, getting towards the end of our 12 gifts. This one is, when in doubt, fly out. Too many decisions are made from, as you've said, Sandy, the ivory tower. And also just as we grow and as more and more folks come into the mix, it's very, very hard to connect oftentimes to the why. And in healthcare, the why is often at the most basic level, the patient. And any which way you can gain insight into the patient experience from a firsthand point of view is always, always, always valuable. I see this a lot too as folks are shifting business models, right? Like let's say you're going from like a D2C to B2B route, an entirely new way of unlocking the same care has like evolved in your company. Go out into those hospitals where you're piloting, meet the people on the ground, build relationships. At the end of the day, like that connection to the human, kind of like what makes care is not only good for the business, it's good for the patients, and it's much more fun that way too, I think. So when in doubt, fly out. That's my gift number 7.
I love this. And I love that it rhymes too. It's so zingy. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. I actually, this is something product is really excellent at, getting in front of your users, understanding their pain points. I don't hear operators doing it as much, but as an operator myself, I probably spent the last year traveling every other week. So 50% of the year was spent on the road in front of people. And it was because we were standing up an entirely new business line, trying to figure out how different roles plug in. How are we going to hire a team around this? What products do we need to build, et cetera, et cetera. And there was no way I could have done that without just being with people. I think one thing you didn't mention for this to be valuable is also as a change management tool, right? Like you going on site is bi-directional. You're not just learning from them. They get to learn from you. You get to run a drip campaign with them, incept ideas with them. You can ask the question of like, what if we did something this way? That has made all the difference for me in like getting things stood up 0 to 1 quickly, because the team members on the other side feel like very bought into it and trust my judgment.
I
frankly.
love that.
Yeah.
I love that. There's also, let's go one more layer of
Yes.
then sharing that things that you picked up on the ground back internally is its own kind of form of art. Any tips around that to help people, be in the room where it happened, kind of?
Yeah. I think this is all part of the very meta drip campaigns that you should be running. This is part of helping people understand the problem. I've seen lots of forms of this. I've seen, 5 pages single spaced of raw notes grouped by themes, which is insightful, but I find that people read those and walk away not really taking much away from it. Like, you as a product manager and operator might be writing tickets or running sprint initiatives off of what you learned off of that level of detail, but no one else really is going to take away much. So I always, after I travel, will include at the top of my monthly business readouts, like 2 or 3 things I learned while in market and why this gave me conviction in the problem that I'm trying to solve. Because not everybody is going to get to travel as much as you are or see the same things.
The things that you're seeing, trying to document them, of course, like, being mindful of PHI and so on.
Yeah.
But photos are actually the tool that you gain when you're in person. So don't forget about photos. I remember when Nikhil did his post about Firsthand, he like took a selfie with one of your team members. One of your peers. And there was something just so humanizing about that single photo that really connected me to Firsthand. And it was such a small thing, but big one.
I love that. I don't underestimate photos. We actually share photos a lot in Slack of like how people organize their work, especially if they're not using our tools. Like, they have their own calendars that they highlight in their own different ways. And we just take a picture and post it and have people react. Actually, the reactions can be a lot more insightful than what you're noticing yourself. So lots of rich detail on this one. I love this. Yeah.
Amazing. All right.
Gift number 8, build an ops roadmap. Deepo, have you ever felt like one of the first times I met you, Deepo, this is why I knew we were going to be really good friends, is you told me as an operator, you're just focused on like this, with your palm in front of you, everything's on fire and you can't see around the corner. And by the way, especially if you're a services business, you're helping Eng and product prioritize their work. And if you're not turning the corner, neither can they. And suddenly you're just in this big fireball, not really prioritizing work appropriately. So I would argue this was your first tip. Think like a PM. An operator needs to have a roadmap just like a tech org would. So, I think at very big companies, I would venture to say like Series D onwards, your roadmap can just be your OKRs and like some simple initiatives you're going to run at to get them. But earlier stage, an operator is in battle building stuff just like a PM is. So what are you focused on? Is it running these pilots to get conviction in a problem? Is it, hiring a team or figuring out what profile you need to hire around? Is it working more closely with your payer ops teams to figure out like better data feeds to inform your workflows? I don't know what it is, but the whole point is invest in playing that 3D chess, stay 3 steps ahead instead of focusing on the fires in front of you. Just build that muscle thinking ahead. So for me, like some tactical examples. So I have my own Notion landing page for our activation business unit. It outlines what we're running at, what are our, revenue goals, what are the business priorities. We have our own sprint board of different ops spikes or, initiatives that we're running at, tasks that need to get done. They're all assigned. That also creates a surface for tech to interact with us because they can assign their bugs or whatever it is to initiatives we're running at as well. So the whole point is it gives visibility to the entire org of where we're bottlenecked or what we're focused on and gives people a surface to react with us. I also think, generally in the process of writing out what initiatives you're focused on, you get a better idea of how should I be prioritizing this? Or is this actually not a problem at all? Because I can't write anything about it, so I shouldn't focus my time on it. Just generally good muscle there.
I think any kind of service level type of challenges that you kind of can't move the needle on, using a roadmap as a way to anchor yourself as like, our goal this quarter is to hit like a 3-minute SLA or to hit a 90% ticket resolution rate. I actually think a lot of quantifiable things in service businesses can be very good candidates for roadmaps because they help everybody march towards the same like North Star metric, which ideally is like either a growth metric or just like a better patient experience metric. But getting that momentum is so difficult a lot of times in ops. And so something very plain and simple like an SLA, moving the dial on that, hugely valuable.
Yep. And extremely tactical. Our head of engineering, Brennan, always says, don't write an initiative if you don't know when it's actually going to be done. And for you, like moving the SLA from X to Y, you know when it's done, versus like build a higher performing platform. Like that's not an initiative as such. That's ideally a vision. But
yes,
I don't know. I think at first hand, we organize ourselves, I think, extremely well, where our tech teams are focused on capabilities, like things that cut across different business units. But a business unit is going to be focused on typically very healthcare-y dense topics, like building a transitions of care program. That, I mean, it is a product, but it is an ops product. Whereas, a tech capability that might enable that are things like work lists or alerts. But building a TOC program involves potentially hiring up nurses, like exploring your data feeds, et cetera, et cetera. So if no one on the tech team is focused on that, then you have to be the person thinking about it. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on this one.
Anything that ends in program is an ops responsibility.
Yeah. And programs are products. Like, I don't know, it's just,
it's
not a helpful distinction, I think.
I'm going to pivot. This was gift 10. So at the finish line here, I had one in the backlog that I decided to take out, but I'm going to bring it back in. So gift number 10 is not to forget about the power of schedule sending. This one just reminded me, Sandy, of that feeling of, maybe folks who are listening didn't see Sandy put her palm like inches away from her face, which is the feeling that so many of us get, especially in ops. And in the kind of constant communication culture that many of us have, Slack, Teams, whatever, there's like this, like, like you're frantically on your keyboard responding to everything. I think schedule send is one of the simplest ways you can force yourself to pause. Especially, I know Sandy has showed me screenshots of responding at like 2 a.m. No good things happen at 2 a.m. over Slack, nor is anybody responding. But scheduling that out for 8 a.m. gives you the opportunity to sleep on it and think about it just like a smudge different. So if you're crafting a big message and it's late at night, or you're finding yourself just kind of in a state of mind where thoughts are frazzled, obviously, like there's many ways you can do it right on a Google Doc, but schedule send is a nice forcing function to help you say, like, I'm going to sleep on it, and then tomorrow it'll do its own thing.
Totally. Love this. Thank you for gaslighting me on the 2 a.m. Slacks. It was actually 3 a.m. and people were responding depot because we all had something to learn. But couldn't agree more. People don't create distance from problems and situations enough, and you need to force yourself to do that. Otherwise, you react too quickly and you create distractions for yourself and others. That is related to my next gift, but I think we skipped a gift. So I'm going to go quickly on gift 9.
Let's go. My bad.
Which is before effort comes focus, but similar vein, which is, can you work harder on a few things instead of trying to do 10 things at once? I think you can be innovative and focused at the same time. And the goal is consistency, not intensity in my day-to-day. So, for example, for me, I have been better about forcing myself to sign off at 6 p.m., not because I don't have enough work to do after that, but I'm forcing prioritizations and distance from problems. Like, you might be solving every little thing if you're working until midnight every day, and that is distracting. It just adds to the noise and chaos and takes you off your feet with your thinking. So, be really principled, trying to start with problem statements in your day-to-day, like, why are you focused on this, instead of just tackling your entire to-do list, and force just signing off to create distance. So
you also have a lot of rituals around your day-to-day. Like, can you give us like that top to bottom just explanation of how you manage your day-to-day?
My calendar template. Yeah. For me, I'm a morning thinker. So I always start my day with 2 to 3 hours of focus time. My day is entirely shot if I don't have it. I've learned that about myself. So that might mean waking up earlier in the day just to get that done. I don't have recurring one-on-ones with people. I love to catch up with folks. I'm hugely extroverted, but I cannot have standing time in my day-to-day unless like I really need something from you, which is often like a direct team member or probably a product counterpart. The other standing things on my calendar are like our shared rituals with product. So grooming, sprint planning, quarterly readouts, and sometimes quarterly one-on-ones with mentors within the business, like our CEO or our CFO. But other than that, I really try to carve out more focus time, less meeting time.
I love that. I think you can kind of take a audit on yourself too. The way I've approached this one is like, where have I been asked to think and where have I been asked to do? And just doing a gut check around your day-to-day environment on like, oh, I'm in do mode, which you can tell by your elevated heart rate and just like proximity to screen, versus I'm in think mode, and you can tell by your heart rate coming down and your ideas flowing out. And so,
Yes.
You can kind of be in touch, I think, a bit on the physiological level around which states you're in. And it's actually just like healthy, I think, to have a bit of that calibration just for our own beings. Yeah.
Totally.
Are we on 10 now then, or 11?
We're on 11 now.
This was hard to keep track of.
Yeah.
Number 11, and Matthew, I'm borrowing this one from you because I have taken your advice on this one and it's made the world a difference. So now I'm resharing it back out into the world, which is to upgrade your software whenever possible to the AI features. I said it. It's necessary on every podcast to drop the word AI, and we've done it for 3 for 3. For real, though, I think one of the biggest challenges in ops stuff is not just like the summarization and GPT and all that world, but it is just recollection of objective information that can find itself nested in so many different places. I particularly love the Notion AI, which is a chat basically functionality over your entire Notion database, where you can ask it information the same way you'd ask GPT, but over your entire data set. I've been playing around with building a GPT-4 bot for very niche information that like just your agents, for example, will need to know over, and you can feed it a ton of different PDFs, catalogs of information, and then turn that into a sidekick towards your service line businesses and so on and so forth. When you are sharing processes, you can do so over Loom, and the Loom AI summarization is masterful and so great. I think we're in an age where like, yes, it's table stakes, all that stuff, but there are some immediate wins you can use it for. And I don't see the harm, obviously being mindful PHI and so on. That's always my caveat in just trying it out and seeing what you can get out of it. You'd be surprised. Maybe you can kind of productize your own business with just like a drop of a hat. So how would you advise an operator who's in the thick of it, they're in the weeds, the fires are raging, to create space to think about this stuff? It's related to our road mapping, thinking ahead. So somebody's like, all right, Depot sounds good, but like, I'm too busy for this.
Yeah, like me, I'm like, yeah, we're hiring team members like crazy. I don't have time to onboard them as much as they deserve. And there's a lot of like colloquial knowledge that is documented somewhere, but I don't know how to onboard someone to it and like have them accountable to it over time. What would you tell me to do?
Oh my God, that's a big question.
Yeah. Top 2 things. Give me advice.
Know.
Top 2 things. Yeah.
I mean, just first of all, just switch it on and try it for yourself, right? Yeah. Like, I think having a new hire be part of a pilot program that you're thinking is interesting is a great way to like co-design this thing together and just be like, yo, we store a lot of information on Notion. I just upgraded our Notion AI. I'm curious like what you can gather and like what you can learn just by using Notion. I'm going to switch this on. Would you mind trying it out and see what comes out of it?
Very cool.
Anytime you're doing information retrieval is a good opportunity to test it out on yourself too. So I would do that. And then this is Matthew Wu's tip. Find somebody who's already really engaged in the AI dialogue and bring them in too. And they can be kind of like that supercharger internal team player for you who can level you up in parallel.
Yeah. A Sherpa, if you will, an AI
yes,
Sherpa.
Yes, a Sherpa.
I need an AI Sherpa in my day-to-day. You can be my AI Sherpa. You got this.
I mean, come on, just like nerd out, you know, like you just need like a solid nerd out sesh where you're like, let me see what I can learn here.
Yeah. All right. Does this bring us to our last gift?
This brings us to our last
Drum gift. Roll, please. It's going to sound dull, but it is so important, especially in value-based care where I sit. But contracts create choke points, so ask dumb questions about them. I know contracts is a very vague term. Like you obviously have contracts with your external vendors, data vendors, whatever it is. I specifically mean our customer contracts. Like what are the value metrics that we are being held accountable to? In healthcare, I think it's easy to distill problems to very simple slogans. And sometimes that can be dangerous because tiny, tiny nuances in how these contracts are worded can create really large ops choke points. So one example is, and keep in mind that figure of, 1,000 building blocks, they're all teetering against each other and the one ops associate is holding it all up. Imagine that like one line of a contract can impact that entire setup, right? So for us, for example, certain states contract differently with their managed care vendors on certain benefits that are carved in versus carved out. And if something is carved out in a given state, that could have a lot of downstream implications, like you're not going to receive claims for that particular line of business. And your claims might be the thing that drives a lot of your medical records retrieval workflows or your, risk adjustment suspecting, whatever it is. So those small lines can create a lot of ramifications. And I think often our BD and actuarial teams don't make those connections, but your ops teams can because they know those workflows really well. So anyway, the tactical advice here is just have time with your BD and actuarial teams and just ask them dumb questions.
Do you have like a list of questions you ask for every contract now?
The major one is like, especially because we're a Medicaid focused company, everything varies by state. So start there and then a lot of follow-on questions happen. But it's going to look different I'm curious for you, especially not focused on value-based care per se, but you are building ops businesses. Did you ever ask questions about what these contracts look like from your customers?
I actually think that's a great use case for AI too. To upload a contract. I don't think it has any PHI and ask it questions like against that. And I think, now you had my brain going on the AI use cases. I think that's an easy way to do it by giving it context around the problems you've seen before on contracts. So short answer is like, no, it's not super relatable. For me personally, obviously contract and reading them thoroughly is important, but I didn't understand really the dependencies that go into value-based contracting that impact workflow downstream.
Yeah.
Good one.
I love that, like, your knowledge doesn't have to be person or team dependent, though. Like, you can do this as an exploratory exercise on your own. If I can get my hands on the contract and upload it to an AI tool.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's like the table, like the stakes for just like updating, like paying the $20 more a month, like trying it out for a bit. Like, what do you lose by that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of the thinking there.
Yeah. Love it.
All right,
Any
Sandy.
parting thoughts, Deepo? Any feels with the 12 gifts?
It was hard to come up with, hard to keep track of 12. I think we needed a timer or like a tracking board.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think for me, the two that stood out were your very first gift, and many of mine were flavors of that. Think like a product person would as an operator. It can take you really far, whether it's rituals, frameworks for thinking about problems, tools you're working out of. You mentioned Loom, Notion, etc. Like those have really been levels up for both of us. The second is that, creating reflection can force some prioritization. That looks different across a lot of different problems. But for me, I think I've learned that startups don't starve, they drown. And it's because you might tend to focus on too many things instead of the core thing that is actually value driving. So how do you make sure you're thinking about that one thing instead of the 10 things? How do you structure your time that way? How do you surround yourself with people and ask the right questions so you're thinking that way? I think operators need to be angling themselves more in that domain than they do today.
Yeah, I love that. Sandy coming here, dropping some wisdom, some objective sources of truth always come from Sandy. And I think there's like a plaque somewhere out there that just has like etchings of wise things that you've dropped in our time together. So now many more people will get that. Very grateful, Sandy, for you being here. Thank you for sharing your gifts.
Thank you, Deepo. And thank you for creating a platform for all of us operators that are stuck in palm mode to look around the corner. We'll get there together, and it's thanks to your leadership here. So
thanks.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.